In the 19th century, America grew around cities because we had mass transit. People were able to take a train to work and hop off, and you ended up with skyscrapers. But in the 20th century, you saw a big shift. We shifted to the suburbs, and those had to be designed around cars. Buildings in New York City and Chicago can be tall because there's a subway station or train station right near there, and that hub and spoke model allows lots of people to come to one spot and then walk to a location. But once you have the car, there's no space to park the car. So you need rules and regulations that kind of remove tall buildings and allows enough parking so that you can drive to exactly where you want to go and park. If you fly into the Northeast, you're going to see a lot of greenery with buildings. But if you're down in California or in Texas, you can see that homes are really kind of close together without a lot of space in between them. And that's because of different development types. In the Northeast, there's a lot of land regulation that requires a lot of extra space around homes. So you end up with a lot of greenery, fewer homes, and higher prices. But if you go to Houston, Texas, you don't have those yards. So you can have a lot of suburban homes at slightly lower prices. And in places with high-paying tech jobs and really good weather like San Francisco, you still have kind of highly regulated homes, but prices just go through the ceiling. Most American suburbs are affordable because after World War II, the highway system made the supply of land almost unlimited for housing, so it felt unlimited. Back in 1949, America allocated less than 1% of America's land, about 18 million out of 2.27 billion for urban living. And that includes, so the definition of urban living includes every suburb. America used less land for city living in 1949 than it did for rural roads. Now, 60 years later, the nation's urban land increased to 70 million acres. That's still less than 3% of the nation's total acreage, like less than we use for growing soybeans. Back in 1900, if you lived on a farm, there wasn't a whole lot to do. But after that, you invented radio and television. That made suburban living feel a lot more connected to society. Now, the national government supported subsidization both by funding the highway system and providing tax benefits for home ownership. Each new highway that ran through a metropolitan area reduced the central city's population by about 18% relative to the surrounding suburbs. People just moved out. And that federal highway subsidies actually increased over time because gas taxes that fund the Highway Trust Fund have been fixed at 18.4 cents since 1993. And as inflation has eroded the tax's value, Washington's used general tax revenues to fund the roads. So cities and everybody else are subsidizing highways and road development. The home mortgage interest tax deduction was originally part of the tax code because all interest that households paid was deductible. The Tax Reform Act of 1986 eliminated the more general interest deduction, but the favoritism shown to homeowners remained. And then after World War II, the federal government expanded its support for home buying with Veterans Administration loans for returning workers. Between 1940 and 1960, the home ownership rate raised from 44 to 62%, and 82% of single-family homes are owner-occupied, but 87% of multifamily homes, like rental buildings, they're rented. When the federal government subsidizes homeowning, it also encourages Americans to leave urban apartments and move to suburban single-family homes. And back in the 1960s and 70s, millions of Americans moved out to the suburbs because they thought the schools there would be better at educating their kids. And as wealthy people left the cities to move to the suburbs, the jobs went out there with them. So to get to a job, you needed to drive to a suburb in a car. So that meant that folks left in this. So that meant that folks who were left in cities were poorer. There was more urban crime, and there was a lower tax base. So there's less money to fund things, and cities ran into debt. That's from Survival of the City by Edward Glazer. Really good book to